¿Ya conoces la publicación más reciente del Centro Olof Palme México? Te invitamos a conocer Inteligencia para la Seguridad, Mitos y Realidades, la experiencia de México. Coordinado por María Cristina Rosas y Guillermo Mendoza Bazán, con las participaciones de Leonardo Curcio, Severino Cartagena, Cincia Luna, Rodrigo Martínez Celis Gugao, Ricardo Márquez Blas, Jacobo Silva, Jorge Tello Luna, Rolando Neri, Wesley Wark y prologado por Jorge Tello Peón. En este libro aprenderás sobre la evolución de los servicios de inteligencia en México, cultura de inteligencia, inteligencia para la seguridad nacional, cooperación internacional para el intercambio de inteligencia, operaciones de desinformación, adopción del ciclo de inteligencia en la iniciativa privada, nuevos campos de la inteligencia, inteligencia económica e inteligencia para la salud. Adquiere ya Inteligencia para la Seguridad, Mitos y Realidades, la experiencia de México. Envíanos un mensaje a través de nuestras redes sociales para adquirir esta y otras obras del Centro Olof Palme México. Contáctanos hoy mismo.
Joseph Robinette Biden Jr.
I, Kamala Davy Harris.
Good morning, Mexico. Good morning, Canada. Good morning, Washington, the US. I'm Cristina Rosas, the head of the Olof Palme Center in Mexico City, and I welcome you all to this special session where we will be analyzing Joe Biden's first 100 days and the impact of his administration in North American relations. To do that, we have three fabulous experts to address these issues: Dr. Susana Chacón, Dr. Kim Nossal, and Dr. Andrew Seele. I would like to introduce briefly our speakers for today's session. Dr. Susana Chacón has postdoctoral studies in international relations at the University of Barcelona and Georgetown University. She has a PhD in history by Universidad Iberoamericana, a master in public administration by the Kennedy School of Government in Harvard University. She also has a master in economics and international politics at CIDE in Mexico City, and she has a bachelor in international relations also by the Universidad Iberoamericana. She is vice president international of the Club of Rome, and she is consultant at De La Calle, Mancera and Madrazo Consultancy Organization. She has been research at the Faculty of Global Studies of Universidad Anáhuac, and she has been coordinator of an interinstitutional group of studies on the US at CIDE, among other activities she has performed. And about her profile, she has been participating in several media, both in Mexico and abroad, and I'm very happy that she is able to be with us today. Welcome, Susana Chacón. Happy to see you.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Maria Cristina. Welcome to everybody. Kim, Andrew.
Dr. Kim Nossal is a Canadian expert on foreign and defense policy, Australian foreign and foreign policy, and Canadian defense policy, Canadian-American relations, international stabilization missions. He went to a school in Melbourne, Beijing, Toronto, and Hong Kong, and attended the University of Toronto, receiving his PhD in 1977. In 76, he joined the Department of Political Science at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, where he taught international relations and Canadian foreign policy, serving as chair of the department in 89 and 1990, and 92 and 96. In 2001, he came to Queen's University, heading the Department of Political Studies until 2009. He served as director of the Center for International and Defense Policy from 2011 to 2013 2013. From 2013 to 2015, he was the executive director of the Queen's School of Policy Studies. He has served as editor of International Journal, the quarterly journal of the Canadian International Council, Canada's Institute of International Affairs, and was president of the Canadian Political Science Association. He served as chair of the Academic Selection Committee on the Security and Defense Forum of the Department of National Defense from 2006 to 2012. In 2017, he was awarded an honorary doctorate by the Royal Military College of Canada. Kim, as always, it is a pleasure to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to this.
Andrew Seele. Andrew Seele has been president of the Migration Policy Institute, a nonpartisan institution that seeks to improve immigration and integration policies through fact-based research, opportunities for learning and dialogue, and the development of new ideas to address complex policy questions since August 2017. He also chairs MPI Europe's Administrative Council. Prior to joining MPI, he spent 70 years at the Woodrow Wilson Center, where he founded the center's Mexico Institute and later served as vice president for programs and executive vice president. He has also worked as a staff in the US Congress and on development and migration programs in Tijuana, Mexico. Dr. Seele's research focuses on migration globally, with a special emphasis on immigration policies in Latin America and in the United States. He is the author of several books, and he is considered a major expert in the field. So, Andrew, what a great honor to have you with us. Welcome. So, initially, I'm going to ask our panelists to start with a brief overview on what they consider have been the major challenges and achievements of Joe Biden in his first 100 days. Many things has happened since last week until now. We will discuss that, of course, but I would like to start with Susana Chacón. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the invitation, María Cristina, and I'm honored to be here with all of you. I'm very happy. Well, let's start saying that Sleepy Biden is not a sleepy at all. He's a speedy Biden, and in these 100 days, we can see that he was very clear about his agenda, and I can say that he has 4 particular interests, which he's dealing very well. The first one is the pandemic. The second one is the economic crisis. The third one is all about climate change. And the fourth is the problem of the division of the society, the US society. And we can say that he has achieved many, many, many things in the 4 of them, but probably in the last one, not so many. For instance, in the case of the pandemic, he was thinking that there were going to be like just 100 million doses, and now 200 million people is already vaccinated with 2 shots. No, so it's like much more of what he started thinking. No, in terms of the economic project, I mean, his projects of economic support to the families, and also the great program of infrastructure, it's a revolution. That's something totally different, something that we haven't seen since the years of Roosevelt. We say that he's breaking with the era of Reagan, in a way that Obama and Clinton wanted to do that, but they couldn't. And now his project is really something which is going much more than what Roosevelt was trying to do. But he has a problem. He has a problem because he has too little time to achieve these decisions and projects. And this is that in next year, with the Republicans against him, everything can change, and this is not good at all. But let's say that he's a real good negotiator. He knows very well how to deal with people. He's used to be in the Congress, in the Capitol for years. So he knows very well how to deal with Republicans and Democrats, and that's an opportunity. In the case of the climate change, we saw that America is back with this session that we had some weeks ago. And the problem of the division of the society, that's something very deep. And Andrew, I'm sure he will say something about this, because the situation in DC is totally different than in the rest of the states. So many people, particularly those who are with Donald Trump, they still think and they believe that the election was stolen. And so it's not going to be an easy situation for Biden. In the case of Mexico, we think that we have a moment of great opportunity if we make good decisions. And this is also related with Canada, because the project, the infrastructure program, and also all the support for the families, the economic support for the families, it's something very good for Canada and also for Mexico if we are in the same direction. And so in the case of Mexico, unfortunately, with this particular government, we're going in the opposite direction. So we have to start making a lot of changes to really have the opportunity to make North America great again. Because this is something that the program is there, the possibility and the opportunity, we have it there, but we have to work in the same direction. Canada and the US are in the same direction in terms of climate change, in the terms of energy, in terms of security. Mexico is something different that we can talk a little bit later. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Susana, for this initial analysis. Just one real challenge is that we are witnessing the rise of Trumpism. Today without Trump, but he's going to be back most probably next year. The problem of social polarization in the US, but also the achievements when it comes to the pandemic and the climate change agenda. And of course, the economic rescue packages that Biden has arranged to stimulate the economy. Of course, yes, Mexico is in a very special situation. We remember President López Obrador took a while before recognizing the victory of Biden. But to me, Biden doesn't look like the guy who has hard feelings on López Obrador. He's very institutional. That, of course, is good because he's not going to take revenge for that. No, on the contrary, he understands the relevance of Mexico and Canada. And that said, I would ask Kim Nossal to provide his views on Biden's first 100 days and how have Canadian-American relations been developing. You know that there is a tradition, there used to be a tradition that the first international trip of the new president in the US is to Canada, or in the case of George W. Bush, it was to Mexico. But Trump changed that. He went to Saudi Arabia, remember? That was his first international trip. But now, with COVID on the agenda, he had this first international visit, this virtual meeting with Trudeau. So how do you see all this, Kim, please?
Thank you very much, and thank you to the Olof Palme Center for sponsoring this, and to you, Maria Cristina Rosas, for chairing it. When I look at the first 100 days of the administration from the perspective of the North, from Canada's perspective, I want to make three brief observations. First of all, from the perspective of the Canadian government, the Trudeau government, there has been a huge degree of relief that we now have a normal president and a normal administration that generally knows what it's doing, and that has been a considerable relief. Particularly in foreign and defense policy, because in that particular area, Canada's interests are not exactly the same as those of Mexico. We have a geopolitical outlook that is a little different than Mexico's. And in that area, the government in Ottawa very much appreciates, it seems to me, the Biden administration's efforts to rebuild America's global leadership after 4 years of a president whose foreign policy, how can one put this diplomatically, was based on some rather deeply flawed misunderstandings of international relations. And in particular, in the geopolitical area, Canada has very much welcomed the return of the United States to multilateralism, to the American-led alliance in Europe, back into the Asia-Pacific or the Indo-Pacific, as the United States and its Pacific allies would like to put it. So that's the first thing, just simply the relief in Ottawa that there's a degree of normalcy back in the White House in Washington. The second observation, though, has to do with something that the Biden administration is not that different in to the Trump administration. In geopolitics, President Biden has sought to differentiate himself as far as is possible from the Trump administration. But in the area of trade, it seems to me what we're seeing is very much a continuation. And Canada, like other friends and trading partners of the United States, has actually been quietly pleased that the protectionist side of the Biden administration has not fully revealed itself in the first 100 days. But over the longer term, we may see the Biden administration's real protectionist inclinations. Certainly, if you just simply look at what happened yesterday in Louisiana and Mr. Biden's Getting America Back on Track tour, you know, the fact is that in what he said, it's clear that he openly celebrated ensuring that everything that was being promised in his infrastructure package would be American built. Every single thing, he said, every single thing, from the deck of an aircraft carrier to the railing on of a new building, it's all going to be built by an American company, American works, American supply chains, so that we invest American tax dollars in American workers. Now, Biden's Buy American promises and his protectionist inclinations pose difficulties for trading partners of the United States, but from the Canadian perspective, happily, that's going to be in the future. Because for now, it's going to be likely that the 1.9 trillion stimulus package is going to have a really positive impact in global terms, on the global scale. But in the longer term, I think that there's a concern in Canada. Since there's now no one left in American politics who are dedicated free traders. The Democrats have always been protectionist, so it's no surprise that this protectionism would continue under Biden. The Republicans used to be the party of free trade, but since the party has become so much the party of Trump, who's a mercantilist, who's anti-free trade, he's a protectionist, he's an economic nationalist, we simply now can't expect that the GOP, the Republicans, will counter that protectionism. So the second observation is the Canadians are very concerned about American protectionism. The third concern is something that Susana mentioned and you, Maria Cristina mentioned, and that is that the first 100 days also remind us about what's not happened in American politics since the end of the Trump administration. The 45th president has not retired into the background to do what former presidents usually do, build their presidential libraries and write their memoirs. On the contrary, Trump remains a potent force in American politics. And even behind the scenes, and not so behind the scenes, he continues to exert a huge influence on the Republican Party. And that, it seems to me, has huge implications for the future, since it means for the rest of us in the world that a return to normal is actually not as assured as it might be. Basically, as Susana said, as long as one of the two parties in American politics is driven by ideas and policies that are authoritarian, anti-democratic, racist, nativist, xenophobic, America's neighbors, its immediate neighbors, Canada and Mexico, and also its friends and allies around the world, simply can't be entirely assured of a return to normalcy. And that's something, certainly, I think that Canadians are concerned about. So let me leave it there.
Thank you, Kim. Yes, when I speak to people all over the world about how they perceive Biden, the word they normally use is decency. They claim decency came back to the White House. And that relates to the relief feeling that you mentioned in your initial analysis, the relief in Canada about having a normal president and a normal administration to handle things. So that's something interesting, but it's not, we cannot take it for granted because Trump, as you already mentioned, and Susana already mentioned that, Trump is there, he's just waiting. And next year we are going to see middle term elections, and Trump is trying to secure the head of the Republican Party for this process. So let's wait and see. Now, yes, I agree with you on the trade front. The Biden administration is not so much different from Trump. You remember this Buy American initiative that is pretty protectionist and nationalist, and it was one of the first measures taken by Biden once he came into office. So yes, Democrats are protectionists, we know, and well, he hasn't revealed already the protectionist face of the Democrats, but we have the USMCA, and that's a cause of concern for Mexico and Canada. And yes, free trade in times of recession, in times of crisis, free trade is difficult to achieve. I believe that many people prefer protectionism in times like this, when you have a crisis provoked by the pandemic and you want to save employment inside in your country and such. But that's a challenge, because now we have a new head of the World Trade Organization trying to foster free trade all over the world, and we will come back to that later. First, I would like to give the floor to Andrew Seele to know your views about these issues. Please.
Thank you, Maria Cristina. Great to be with you today, and great to be with Susana and Kim as well. It is a different time, clearly, in the United States. I mean, I think we feel it. I think with all the cautions that Susana and Kim have put in there, which is we are living a moment of great polarization in the United States. There is a large segment of the U.S. population, between a quarter and a third, that feels like the elections were stolen from them, that largely disbelieves not only the election results, but almost any other source of authority, right? The distrust, sort of the things that we would take for granted at some point, you know, when former Senator Moynihan said that, you know, you're entitled to your own conclusions, but not to your own facts. At this point, we have a large segment of the population that feels that the facts are in question. And that has huge consequences for all institutions in the United States, but also for governance. So I think that's a caveat, and I think the rest of the world sees that. The rest of the world knows that, you know, even though there's a return to normalcy with Joe Biden, this could change at some point. I do suspect that if Republicans return to office in 4 years from now, if a Republican wins the presidency, it will not be Donald Trump. It will be someone who channels some of the energy of Donald Trump, but is probably more of a conventional politician. And so I don't think we're going to see a return to the Trump era. but we don't know what that looks like, right? And so we don't really know, and, you know, for the rest of the world looking at this, there is a, you know, a grounded skepticism in, you know, what is the future of the United States? What is it even in 2 years if Biden loses his majority in the House and Senate? So I think there is there are reasonable doubts, and at the same time, there is a strategic moment that should be taken advantage of. And I do suspect that even if a Republican wins in the future, there will be much more of they will fall more within the broad consensus, at least on foreign policy, if not on domestic policy, but remains to be seen. Obviously, what we've seen is an improved tone about the relationship from the United States, both towards Mexico and towards Canada. I can't think of any other time in American history where we deliberately picked a public fight with Canada, with the people of Canada and the government of Canada. I mean, it's usually sort of accepted wisdom, and not to say we didn't have issues we disagreed on, but in which there was sort of a public demonizing of Canada. That just seems to be, that in U.S. politics is like going after puppies and kittens. I mean, or apple pie, or it's just sort of an axiom of we neglect Canada, we don't understand Canada. I mean, there's lots of problems with the U.S. relationship with Canada, but we do love Canada. I mean, there is sort of a sense, it's a naive love. It is not always an informed love, but there is sort of a sense that this is not a complicated relationship. In fact, we underestimate the complexity of the relationship in the United States. So that was a little bit of an unusual blip in American history. That's gone. I think most Canadians are happy with that. Most Americans feel it's a return to normalcy. With Mexico, the Mexican relationship the Mexico-U.S. relationship is much more complex. There has always been a more complicated, much more nuanced and much more divergent set of perceptions, both from the U.S. population towards Mexico and the Mexican population towards the United States. That said, it had been trending, and in fact still continues to be trending positive in the United States and is overwhelmingly positive in Mexico, with question marks, right, on both sides. That said, we have emerged from the moment of demonizing Mexico under Donald Trump to a moment which returns us to what had been the political consensus of Democrats and Republicans, which is that Mexico is a partner and an ally. We have differences, but we are, it is necessary. And I think Biden genuinely believes this, that Mexico and Canada are essential partners, for the future of the United States. I think he almost takes that as accepted wisdom, simply that the U.S. cannot do other than think of the two neighboring countries as partners and allies. That said, so the tone is better, the assumptions are better. What that means is we return to the real complexity of the relationship. So my second point of view is we're back, one, tone is better, two, we're back to complexity. And complexity means, yes, tone is better, but there are now lots of issues on the agenda. There are all these real issues are going to be there. Before it kind of got it really got narrowed down to one or two issues that Donald Trump focused on, and the Canadian government and the Mexican government knew that they had to manage those one or two issues that were salient for the White House. Now we're back to these complex agendas. For the Canadian government, that's great. It doesn't mean there aren't conflicts, but it means that there is a large agenda on which there can be negotiations back and forth. With Mexico and with López Obrador administration in particular, I think it is actually less comfortable in some ways than what was once, at least for the president, if not for the foreign ministry and for a broader set of cabinet actors. But I think for López Obrador's personality, he was comfortable with knowing that there were only one or two issues on which he had to check the box with Donald Trump. He also is somewhat skeptical of how much he wants to engage with the United States, and only having to do it on one or two issues was a lot better than having to manage the range of complexity. And now we're back to the range of complexity in the relationship. And I think that's, not his comfort zone. But on the other hand, I think for other people in the Mexican government, it is seen as positive. My final point is, I think there is a North America agenda ahead of us, which we should take advantage of. And I would love to see a leaders summit sooner rather than later among the three heads of state of the three countries, because I think there are at least three issues, possibly four, that should be on this. And I have an article in El Universal today which talks about this. It actually, I think it's called The Civilizing Influence of Canada, Kim. So, you can, which is only one of the points, but it was the most fun point to make, which is, I think, Canada has a civilizing influence on both Mexico and the United States, but also on the Mexico-U.S. relationship. The Mexico-U.S. relationship has become very transactional. It is and that's partially has to do with the skepticism that President López Obrador has towards the United States, but it's also true of the way the U.S. government operates, which is, there's sort of a set of issues. Policymakers are trying to check through boxes on things that they have to get done. So they're trading migration enforcement for vaccines. They're pushing back, as we saw López Obrador pushing back on USAID funding for an NGO this morning, so, that sort of transactional in return for something else that the U.S. is going to have to respond to. He knows the U.S. is, he's talking to Vice President Harris today, and the U.S. is coming with a set of demands. So he's pushing back with a set of demands as well. I mean, the real demands are probably elsewhere, but it becomes a very transactional relation between the U.S. and Mexico. The advantage of North America is it forces us, the North American leaders forums, whatever they are called in the future, is that it forces the three governments to step back and think about a broader agenda of integration. And I don't think we're going to get back to the place we were 10 years ago or even 5 years ago when people talked about, integration in North America as some big, vision. I don't think we're at a moment where particularly the Mexican government wants to go down that path. And I'm not sure the U.S. government, I'm not sure the Biden administration has the capacity to go down that path with other things. But I do think there are three issues that should be on the agenda. One is how we manage the pandemic. We're coming out of a pandemic that requires some coordinated action because, frankly, we have border communities and we have a lot of transit back and forth and we have a lot of economic ties. And so we need to actually time our recovery process in a way that makes sense that matches that degree of integration. Because if, the U.S. comes out of this faster than Mexico, there's going to be lots of issues in large parts of the United States and indeed in the free-flowing movement between the two countries. And despite all the restrictions, it's still pretty free-flowing. They're going to continue to bubble up, right? Same thing with Canada and the US, although those processes are much closer. And we should also be thinking about the next pandemic and the next pandemic within this pandemic, right? I mean, there's variations, there's strains of COVID-19 that are coming back. We might have to revisit this. There will be other diseases coming down. I mean, we saw this with H1N1. We should be using this as an opportunity to get the bureaucracies of the three countries, as well as the senior policymakers, thinking a little bit about this. Basket two is the economic recovery. I mean, even if there's no big vision of economic integration right now, there's a practical vision. There's a practical necessity of making sure all three countries are working together to restart the economies, to make sure that there is some coincidence or at least mutual understanding about what each is doing, and that in terms of the industries that do cut across the three countries, which there are many, we are coordinating policies in a way that do not do damage to the supply chain and the real integration that exists. And the third one, which you knew I was going to get to, is of course regional migration. And migration is an issue that obviously matters more to the US and Mexico than to Canada. Migration in general matters to Canada, don't get me wrong. In fact, Canada does a great job of managing migration, in a very thoughtful way. But the current situation, which I think they should be talking about, is Central America, right? And you say, why Canada? Well, first of all, I think the Canadian government really wants to get more engaged on this issue. Canada has enormous expertise in 4 areas that really matter. First is development, as well as resources, but also real expertise on issues of development, on issues of labor pathways, on issues of protection, and on issues of migration management. And my sense is when the US and Mexico get together and talk about this, when the governments talk to each other, it comes back to that same transactional agenda. What's really needed is coming up with a slightly broader agenda, slightly more visionary agenda, which then they can sit down and be transactional in, right? But a slightly broader agenda. My sense is this is the opportunity among the three to think about what that broader agenda around those 4 ejes, those 4 axes are, the migration management, development, labor pathways, and protection. And taking advantage of the fact that Canada has some real knowledge and expertise in this, but also brings out the best of Mexico and the United States. And so there are 2 issues that I think are truly North American, and a third issue, which is much more in the short-term relevance for Mexico and the United States, but where I think Canada is more than willing to step in and would be a really constructive partner, and it would be good for the other 2 to have that as a trilateral discussion. So let me put that on the table as a future, as the next 100 days of Biden, and let's see if it happens.
As the next 100 days, let's wait and see. Yes, I'm glad that you brought the issue on the North American Summit as a possibility in the weeks or months to come, because this has been an issue we've been addressing in previous webinars. And we commented on the fact that Donald Trump favored bilateral over trilateral or North American relations. He preferred to talk directly to Mexico or to Canada instead of promoting a North American view on different issues. And this seems to be the case now with Biden in the presidency. We may see again a return of the spirit of a North American community. I'm not saying we're going to build right ahead a North American community, but it may be considered now under the Biden administration. The last time we saw the president of the US and Mexico and the prime minister of Canada in a North American summit was back in 2016. After that, Donald came to the presidency and we didn't see any of that. And well, Andrew has mentioned a number of issues about the new normal in North American relations and the new normal with Canada and Mexico and the complexity issues that we will be addressing. I would like to invite people who are following us in Facebook and here in Zoom to comment and make questions to our panelists. I would like to go back with Susana on the bilateral agenda between Mexico and the US. We know that there are three major issues in the bilateral agenda that happen to be trade, security, migration, but also now environment. Environmental issues are becoming very prominent in the bilateral agenda and in the global agenda. Because this is a priority for the Biden administration. So what do you see? What do you see in these traditional issues that I believe are rather complex and some of them are, suggesting problems for Mexico during the Biden administration?
Thank you, Maria Cristina. Yes, you said climate change, but also energy. And
yes,
in itself, energy, it's going to be difficult. I see that we are in a moment of a very difficult situation and a very difficult relation, because if we remember, the first two calls that Biden made was to Canada and was to the Mexican president, the second one, no? And there we had a tone which was totally different for Canada and also for Mexico. The Canadian call was very long. They talk about the agenda, the different issues of the agenda. And you said that Biden was not taking any revenge. Of course not. He will not. He's a good diplomat. So and he knows how to deal with people. But he's going to be much more institutionalized. All the politics and the complexity that Andrew was talking, that's going to be a return to do politics the way we had to do them, no? So it's like, I see that President López Obrador now has a project which goes in a totally different direction than Biden's proposals in energy, I don't know if trade, but because he supported the agreement with Canada and the US, but there's a lot of doubt that he's gonna keep all the treaties the way they were negotiated. So he changes the rules from one moment to the other. And so the private sector, the Mexican private sector and also the international private sector, they don't want to invest in Mexico because they don't have security that their investments are going to stay the way they were supported to be committed. So there are a lot of problems in terms of migration. Andrew was talking just about Central America migration, but I want to bring into the table also the Mexican migration, because with the economic situation that we are living now, there was a moment like 3 years ago that there was balance. Mexican migration to the States was basically zero. And the problem was Central American migration, no? But now that was reversed, and now there are many Mexicans that are trying to go again because they see that they have much more income working 1 month in wherever, Canada, Texas, or somewhere else. So my issue here, Andrew, is that when Kamala Harris is coming here, as you mentioned, is because they are worried about Central America, but not about Mexico. And we have to build also a policy, political, bilateral cooperation in migration for Mexico. And I don't know if they are putting this in the table, but I think it's something very important. So I have the feeling, probably you don't, that there is not good chemistry between Biden and López Obrador. All the contrary with Trudeau. With Trudeau, from the very beginning, as Kim said, Trudeau said, we are happy and we are relieved. In the case of López Obrador, was not the case. He was very upset because he wanted Trump to continue, and he played for Trump. So probably in the second levels, in the State departments, the situation is going to be different. But still, with all these programs that López Obrador has that are against the projects of Biden, I think it's going to be a very complex and difficult relation, because it's going to be institutionalized relation. It's not going to be like Donald Trump's, that if López Obrador wants to do whatever, I don't see. If he has the Guardia Nacional in the southern border stopping the Central Americans. No? So I think it's going to be a difficult moment for Mexico. So, and we, in our case, we have to start thinking in the longer term. These next 3-4 years are going to be difficult for both. As I was saying in my first comment, I think we have a great opportunity to take it now. To, for instance, in the case of the infrastructure program, I think that we have to build together how to work, because the US is going to need Mexicans and Central Americans to work in. It's going to be a huge program, the one of infrastructure. So that's an opportunity to build together how can we work and support also the program. So there are many issues here that I think that we have to consider as an opportunity, but for that we have to change the decisions that the Mexican president is taking now.
Thank you, Susana. When I mentioned trade, I was thinking about some aspects of the USMCA, for instance, labor provisions and the environmental issues. But we will get back to that in a minute. I would like to ask him, because Susana put it very well. There's this sense in Mexico that there's a lot of chemistry between Trudeau and Biden, but not so between López Obrador and Biden, nor between López Obrador and Trudeau. And you may remember that during the George W. Bush years, the feeling in Canada was that George Bush was very close to Fox and that Canada was left behind. But now we are having the opposite feeling here. We believe that Trudeau and Biden may work together, may go along, because, as you mentioned, there is a geopolitical situation between the two that puts them in a different context as opposed to Mexico. But there's also this chemistry issue. And there's also the feeling in Mexico that Mexico-Canadian relations are in a pretty bad shape. So I would like to know your views about Mexican-Canadian relations and all this supposed chemistry between the protagonists of this episode.
It's a good observation. Let me begin with Canada-Mexican relations. It seems to me that one of the things that we have not gotten over is the bad relationship that was in place in 10-11 years ago, when the Canadian government of Stephen Harper imposed severe restrictions on the movement of Mexicans into Canada, imposing a visa requirement that really had it seems to me, a profound impact, not just simply the impact in Mexico itself and on Mexicans, but on the relationship. And it seems to me that we've never really moved to put that into the background. And part of that, it seems to me, is a function of personality, that we haven't had a prime minister and a Mexican president that have had the kind of, as you put it, the kind of chemistry that might allow a fresh start in the relationship. The chemistry that one sees between Biden and Trudeau, I think, is it's in part a function of the relief that is in place after Trump. In part, it's a function of the fact that Mr. Biden and Mr. Trudeau have similar ideological views. And from that perspective, it seems to me that Mr. Trudeau and President Lopez Obrador don't share that ideological perspective. Mr. Trudeau was always very diplomatic in his expressed views about Mr. Trump, but there's absolutely no question at all about what Mr. Trudeau really thought of Donald J. Trump. Whether or not the chemistry aspect will be in place will be seen when we get to the point where the three of them get together in person. I agree 100% with Andrew that what we really need is for there to be an in-person meeting. And that, it seems to me, is going to be not possible until the pandemic is behind us. I cannot see the three governments moving the kind of people that are normally associated with summit diplomacy across our borders to do that. And while it might be possible to do a Zoom summit, Zoom summits, like Zoom meetings, rarely allow the chemistry that occurs at the highest level, really out of range of the camera, but can only work in an in-person element. So I'm hopeful that as we move past the pandemic, that we actually will see a summit of the three leaders, not a repeat, please, of the three amigos of 20 years ago, but rather a meeting, ideally, of the minds to be able to put the kinds of things that both Andrew and Susana have been talking about in place.
Thank you, Kim. While I listened to you, I was remembering that when we had the first draft of the USMCA agreement, it was a draft coined by the US and Mexico only. And I remember President Trump said to Canada, if you want to join us, please be our guest. And that was very insulting for Canada. And I believe that also damaged the relation between Mexico and Canada indirectly. But I believe that's an issue we may want to consider. Speaking about Zoom meetings, I agree with you. Zoom meetings doesn't allow for much chemistry between participants, and especially they don't allow for sensitive issues to be addressed. You need to be face-to-face. I mean, we need that. And my concern is that President López Obrador doesn't like to travel much. The only time he has traveled abroad was to Washington to meet with Trump And he says that the best foreign policy is domestic policy. That's his saying. He has honored that saying. He doesn't travel much. He has left Mexico's foreign relations in the hands of our Minister for Foreign Affairs, for good or for bad. Now, speaking about the Harper years, yes, that was a major change in Canadian foreign policy in many respects. As you may remember, Kim, I was president of the Mexican Association for Canadian Studies, and the foreign ministry used to support associations like this all over the world so that we understand better Canada and its role in international relations and to foster Canadian studies worldwide. But that was finished under Harper, for instance. And also the issue on peacekeeping operations and other issues we could comment about the Harper legacy. But let me move quickly to Andrew. Andrew, of course, the Mexico-US agenda it's really complex. And the arrival of Biden to the presidency has prompted several diplomatic changes between the two countries. You may remember that Ambassador Marta Bárcena had to leave office, and we sent a new ambassador to Washington. We still don't have a new ambassador from the US to Mexico. Many names on the side of Biden have been mentioned, but let's wait and see. That's a very important issue in the bilateral relationship. And also, speaking about migration, which is your field of expertise, it is complex. Susana was already mentioning the fact that now Mexicans are taking over Central Americans when it comes to migration into the US. And Roberta Jacobson, I remember she was somehow advising Biden on the issue and she quit. So I don't think that's a good sign. So give us your views about these issues. How complex is becoming the agenda, especially on migration issues?
Well, yeah, let me start by just, echoing something that Susana and Kim have said, and let me say it more bluntly even, which is, and I'm going to offend some people in Mexico by saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway, which is, my sense is that Biden and Trudeau are ideologically similar because they are center-left politicians. López Obrador comes from, is a fairly conservative politician. I mean, and you look at this both in terms of stimulus bills. Mexico is the only large country in the Western Hemisphere that has not done a major stimulus. He's certainly socially conservative on a number of issues, or at least ambivalent on a lot of social issues that most progressives would define as being part of a center-left platform. And he is, certainly in questions of the role of civil society, a deep skeptic, right? It may be you may want to argue that it's an older fashioned view of what it means to be on the left, but in many ways, I think there are a number of Mexicans who've said that, he's actually fairly conservative, right? I mean, and so the irony here is, I have to say, I was one of the people who thought of him as being a center-left politician and thought that there was a real opportunity between sort of Democrats and liberals in Canada and Morena in Mexico. But Morena has proved to be a much more conservative and more than, it's not even a non-ideological, pragmatic party, perhaps, with a leader that is, occasionally goes left, but often goes right on issues. So there isn't really the ideological affinity that I would have thought existed, and I thought naturally should exist when there are the left was in power in the three countries at the same time. They're very different. That said, if Kim's vision of the three of them sitting down and actually having a conversation in person, and I agree, I think that is by far and away, they may have to have a Zoom meeting first, but that is the one that matters, right? If you can get them to sit in the room, I don't think it's going to end up with the three of them, laughing, over each other's jokes or, shooting back, tequila shots together at, 1 a.m. I expect a more somber and formal affair, but I do think there's a sense of respect towards Mexico, which is important. I think, my sense is that Biden and Trudeau do have chemistry. López Obrador will not, and there's a language barrier there as well, right? I mean, the López Obrador does not speak English, Biden does not speak Spanish, Trudeau does not as well. I'm not sure French gets him there. So there will be a language barrier. There'll be an interpreter, whispering in each one's ears. It's not going to be smooth. But I do think there is a symbolism and a deep respect towards Mexico as a partnership with the United States and Canada, which López Obrador will appreciate, right? And I don't think that should be, you know, and I think that is a reward enough. I mean, I don't think you need foreign relations to be a buddy story either. I mean, it's nice when there's chemistry. I mean, Obama and Angela Merkel loved each other, and you know, there's all sorts of, you know, we can run through the buddy relationships in the world, but it doesn't need to be that way. It does need to be mutually respectful and ideas in which there's a coincidence. And I do think the element of respect and the fact that Mexico is an equal partner with Canada and the United States, especially if they set it up that way, right, to be truly, you know, the three partners as equals, matters to López Obrador, because I do think as his read of history, you know, and if you read the history books he's written, he's a very good historian, actually. It's very interesting to read his, you know, but it's a political historian, right? He's writing his own sense of sort of Mexico's political history and what he writes. He sees a constant humiliation of Mexico, a constant desprecio, no, a constant sort of putting down of Mexico. And so anything that tries to set that right today and show that he has brought Mexico a degree of respect with its neighbors that Mexico was not accorded in the past could really matter. I do think migration is the most nettlesome issue. I would say Roberta Jacobson actually only signed up for 100 days, so she left at the end of the 100 days. And I know this because she told me before she joined. She said I will be gone for, because she's also on our board, so she said I would be gone for 100 days. So that was the reason she left, is she had not agreed to stay up for more. She did not want to be in more. That said, I think there's a question about who is managing the relationship. We hear all the journalistic stories. I have no other knowledge of this than what we've seen from the news stories, is that Ken Salazar, former Secretary of the Interior, former senator, is likely to be nominated, but that'll take a while. I don't know, you know, I gather the vice president is in charge of the diplomatic relationship with Mexico, but she's also in charge of 2 or 3 other things. So, you know, it's not her full-time job. I do think there's depth at the NSC and the State Department to support her. But I do think they see, to Susana's point, I do think they see migration exclusively in a Central American lens. Ironically, they see Mexico as a partner in addressing this, right? I mean, so Mexico is no longer the source country. It is the sort of partner in figuring this out. Complicated partner, right? With different points of view and different interests. And at the same time, the largest number of adults are Mexicans, right? I mean, crossing very few families and unaccompanied minors, but large numbers of adults are Mexican. And I think the question is this a result of a really bad year in Mexico, of an, you know, severe economic decline last year of 8 or 9%? Or is this primarily a question of change in US policy? I mean, one of the strange things that happened, the unexpected effects of Title 42 of this expulsions, the summary expulsions under a health order back to Mexico, is what used to happen for Mexican adults who were, you know, single adults who were detained at the border, is that they would be given a warning the first time and sent back to Mexico. The second time they'd be prosecuted for a misdemeanor. And the third time they'd be prosecuted for a felony, what they call consequence delivery system. They no longer are doing that. And so there's also no consequences for a Mexican single adult who's young and willing to try and really wants to get into the US to try multiple times to get across right now, right? And because it's Mexico, I mean, it's different for a Salvadoran who may feel uncomfortable being expelled 2 or 3 times to Mexico, but for a Mexican, you know, who is willing to try it. Not, of course, not everyone's willing to do this, but thinking of a category of 18 to 25-year-olds, you know, who are willing to try this to improve the life of their families, you know, this actually is doable. And so I don't think we know how much is the push factor, how much is, by the way, the pull factor of the United States, the economy reheating in the US after a long period, and how much is the policy change. But actually, it is a missing component. The US and Mexico, to the best of my knowledge, are not really talking about migration between the 2 countries, with the exception of López Obrador putting in southern Mexico into the Central American equation on development assistance. He's dropping that in. The US never says anything about it. It's sort of interesting to watch. But other than that, there's really doesn't seem to be a lot of conversation, because the assumption is this will go away as soon as the policy goes away. And that may or may not be true. We'll see what happens.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew. We have some questions that have been posed by people who are following us. There is a very interesting question. It is this: the US has thrown its support behind a move of the World Trade Organization to temporarily lift patent protections for coronavirus vaccines. Critics say it strips financial rewards from cutting-edge drug developers. The decision by US President Joe Biden comes amid pressure from Democrats in his party to remove patent protections. Can or should Mexico and Canada join this move? What's your take on that, my friends? Susana, do you have a comment on?
I think that Biden's decision was a very important one doing this. But in terms of Canada and Mexico, our problem is that we don't have vaccines. So it will help us a lot. We want to start developing some vaccines here in Mexico, but for the moment, all what we have comes from abroad. So if this is possible, that would be great. But we know that many people in Europe or in Asia, they said this won't be possible. And so we'll see what happens. No? But for Canada and for Mexico, it seems to me that it would be really a good relief, no?
I remember there were claims by the head of the World Health Organization about a few countries concentrating most of vaccines, and he has claimed that this shouldn't be the case. And he mentioned Canada, that has many vaccines, more than needed for its population. I don't know what's the situation there, if you could provide some insights on that, Kim.
Susana is quite correct that Canadians would not themselves, or Canadian firms wouldn't themselves benefit from the Biden initiative. I think that any country that has an interest in seeing the pandemic put behind all of us would come on board. It's not as though the pharmaceutical companies would be impoverished by such an initiative, but you know, because like Mexico, we don't have an indigenous vaccine production capacity at present. The main point of supporting the Biden initiative would be essentially to ensure the maximum and the speediest global distribution of vaccines on a global basis. In the context, though, of the broader aspect of vaccine production, Canada ordered huge numbers of doses, but we actually don't have huge numbers of doses. Okay. So, for example, the Trudeau government purchased many more millions of vaccine doses than there are Canadians. And the idea was essentially that once Canadians got vaccinated, then the surplus would be sent elsewhere. The difficulty, of course, is that because we don't have any domestic indigenous production, we depend on, for example, the importation of AstraZeneca vaccines from India, and that has been, of course, interrupted by what has happened in India. So from that point of view, it seems to me that what we're going to have to look at is to sort of see a kind of a more global distribution system in place.
Yes, I agree. The other day, I talked to the Dominican ambassador to South Korea, and he mentioned that his government bought millions of vaccines, more than the Dominicans need, but they have not arrived. We don't have the production needed. And I'm fearing that the situation in India is worsening everything because, you know, that's the world's pharmacy. And they are experiencing a tragic situation right now. So this is bad news, of course. Yes, I believe we should find a way to improve distribution of vaccines, but most of all production of vaccines. Now, there's another question about something that happened last week. You remember this summit sponsored by Biden on the environment, and he invited a number of leaders from all over the world, among them President López Obrador. President López Obrador says this question, proposed Biden to extend the programs Young Building the Future and Sowing Lives. Those are social programs that are being developed within Mexico and have been extended to Central American countries in order to promote development in those countries or within Mexico and prevent people from migrating into Mexico or into the United States. The question is, what do you think about the programs proposed by President López Obrador to the Biden administration? I don't know if Andrew would like to comment on that.
Sure, I think, I think they have their merit. The merit of the two programs that López Obrador is proposing is that they require very little infrastructure. They're the kind of things that you can go directly from, that sort of bypass. They don't leave a lot of opportunities for corruption. They don't get into tricky questions of governance. And they're more or less a direct transfer of resources to people via salaries, right? And there's some merit to that actually in a country like Honduras or Guatemala, where more complex programs tend to lend themselves one of two things, either to corruption, or to governments to get around corruption, and this is what the U.S. government usually does, but also a lot of the Europeans, is hiring middlemen, right? I mean, middle institutions, right? I mean, which is hiring a U.S. organization, which then takes 50% of the funding, and subcontracts to local organizations, but is accountable to the U.S. government or the other foreign government for making sure the resources are spent well. And both of those have a problem, right? I mean, if you try and get money into these are much less direct ways of dealing with development. So López Obrador's strategy has a beauty to it, which is its simplicity, right? Which is, it is a way to get people to create, a way to create jobs very quickly in a way that doesn't leave a lot of options for corruption. That said, I think there's a very different vision from Washington and from the Biden administration, which is that some of the problems have to be dealt with in a more complex way. And so I think there's a place for very direct interventions like the one that López Obrador is proposing. And I think there are others you could think of that are, building on efforts that are being done by civil society organizations that could be funded and scaled up to some extent in some of these countries and in specific regions within those countries. And there should be some simplicity in design. And then there are other things that they want to do, which are really more about creating accountability, creating monitoring capacity for civil society, to creating countervailing institutions within government, like, strong attorney general's offices, judges that are independent, judicial system that's independent, so on and so forth, that are going to require more complex interventions. And I think there's a difference between the vision of the two governments in this. I mean, Mexican government, beyond even López Obrador, López Obrador likes the tool he has, and there's his two programs, but it's also true of the Mexican government writ broadly, thinks about non-intervention, right? So even the idea, Mexican government may not think much of the Honduran government. I don't know what they think, but I'm just saying that as a possibility. No offense to Hondurans, but I'm not sure what they think, but they're not going to get into judging the Honduran government, right? I mean, the Mexican government doesn't do that because of its policies of non-intervention. The U.S. government has no problem judging the Honduran government, right? I mean, in fact, they love judging the Honduran government, right? So, I mean, I think there's a difference in vision. The U.S. is thinking about how do we actually change, if we're going to really help people, we have to change the way the structures work on the ground. I also find a beauty in that. I'm an American, so I find a beauty in that, but I also recognize there's limitations to how much you can do that successfully in someone else's country, right? And there's a certain need to both be ambitious in recognizing problems of governance, but also restrained in doing things that go beyond what a foreign government should do in trying to reshape someone else's country. And somewhere in the middle, there's, and this is why I think, by the way, I mean, Kim, this is why I think we have to bring the Canadians in. I mean, because I think somewhere between these 2 points of view, it would be nice to sit down with the Canadian government and at least Justin Trudeau to say, Joe, I see what you're saying. This is what you want to do to shape things. Andres, I get the fact that you really don't want to do interference. We're gonna, here's how we do it as Canadians, and let's agree to disagree and to come up with something comprehensive in which we're each doing slightly different things, because we're not gonna reach a point of consensus on this. And it's okay that each country does something slightly different as long as they're talking about it and coordinating.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, it's complex. And well, Mexico has been supporting this program in El Salvador and Honduras, and now in Guatemala. It started already in Guatemala. Let's see what happens there. Well, we are approaching the end of this fantastic panel, and we have another question, and I would invite you to, if you want to answer or comment on it, and then provide us your view on what good the next 100 days of the Biden administration would like. So the question is, under the López Obrador government, a new national security agenda was developed. This national security agenda was approved by the Mexican Congress and prevents cooperation from Mexico with the US on security matters. What do you see in terms of the impacts it may have on the Mexico-US relationship? I don't know if Susana, for instance, would like to comment on that.
I can take that if you want.
Okay.
I think it's very important, the question, because there is a law of national security. It's not a policy of national security. It's a new law of national security that says that all the intelligence agencies from the world, they have to send reports monthly of what they are doing. But this is basically for American intelligence agencies and basically for DEA. So this tell us that there is no cooperation, bilateral cooperation at all in terms of security between Mexico and the US. And the Americans are very, very upset because they relieve General Cienfuegos. And after, this was a problem that López Obrador was very upset because they took him in the States and then he's back, no? So there is no cooperation at all. And it seems to me that it's going to be hard to build this cooperation because for the American view, it seems to me that they see that Mexico has no policy at all in terms of security. What López Obrador says, hugs, abrazos, no balazos, that's not a policy. I mean, we can see that violence in Mexico, unfortunately, is not being reduced at all. And it's definitely is going to be difficult to have bilateral cooperation. What we saw, I guess it was last week, that Ambassador Landó talks about what López Obrador is doing in terms of security, that he's not doing anything and there is no policy. Now that he's not ambassador, he can talk openly, but even when he was in Mexico, he was very upset. So I don't know, I mean, I think my feeling is that the Americans are very upset in security agencies because of what's going on in Mexico.
Thank you, Susana. Yes, I believe that the hugs, not bullets policy is not good. I believe the social programs are okay, but they should be accompanied by a policy on security issues. Otherwise, we are not going to see a decreasing of crime and violence in Mexico. But, well, that's the situation on the security front. So I would ask Kim, Andrew, and again later Susana, to provide your final views about what good North American relations under Biden would look in the next 100 days. What do you expect? What do you see? Kim.
Thank you very much. I think that the next 100 days will be probably dominated, at least the next little while, will be dominated by the management of the pandemic along the borders of our three countries. And a return, I mean, part of the difficulty here is that a return to normalcy will be made more complex by the fact that the rates of inoculation, vaccination, the nature of those vaccinations will differ amongst the three countries, partly
Yes.
because of where production is located, different in the United States from both Mexico and Canada, partly the result of the different rates of vaccination. The Americans very successfully spreading vaccination. Canadians not so bad, Mexicans still problematic. But what I will find interesting is the fact that because vaccination has become such a highly politicized issue in the United States, that in fact, the achievement of broad immunity in the US isn't going to be, paradoxically enough, isn't going to be achieved as readily as if vaccination had not been such a highly politicized issue. And that, it seems to me, is going to complicate the return to what Andrew talked about earlier as the sort of the fluidity across the border, both north and south for the United States. And so I think that in the context of North American politics, that's going to be a key issue.
Okay, thank you, Kim. Yes, I was reading the other day an analysis, I believe it was in the Washington Post, about people now in the US not willing to take vaccination. That's another problem, because vaccination has proceeded very fast, very well. 200 million people have been vaccinated already, but now some people are reticent, and the anti-vaccination movement is also gaining some fans. So it's becoming critical to reach the so-called herd immunity. Okay, Andrew, what are your thoughts about the next 100 days for Biden?
I mean, I think I will agree with him. I think we are still in a moment where all three countries are looking primarily at their domestic challenges. Biden is going to be obsessed with making sure he gets as many people possible as vaccinated. It looks like we're going to get vaccines for teenagers starting in a week or two, and trying to get as close to herd immunity as possible, trying to get his infrastructure plan and his working families plan through Congress. He's on a sprint to do that. The one thing, however, he does worry about is migration, because it is the one thing that is affecting his poll numbers, and it's affecting his ability to work with Republicans. And it's the one thing he does not get good marks for. And so I think that does mean that Mexico will be on his mind. He has an urgency in getting things done. I hope there will also be, I don't want to be over optimistic, but I do hope that there will be a broader conversation, even if it is just by Zoom initially, among the three leaders, and at least they'll start those conversations. And what it means, it'll also get the bureaucracies to start the conversations about pandemics, about economic integration, and about migration in a slightly bigger way. And I hope that happens. I think the fourth issue could be, by the way, the environment and energy, but I don't know if that'll end up being on the agenda. But I hope that happens. I don't think there's a lot of bandwidth in any of the three countries to spend a lot of time on this, but there is an opportunity to start the conversation and then be able to have it in person at a moment when all three leaders have some more bandwidth to do this. And thank you, María Cristina, for having us today.
Thank you, Andrew. Susana, your thoughts, your views about the next possible 100 days?
Thank you so much, María Cristina. Very quick, it seems to me, as I said at the beginning, that we have a great opportunity to start building together. I agree with Kim and Andrew, and I'm not going to repeat what they said, but I just want to mention that in next month we are having midterm elections here in Mexico.
Yes.
And I think that after June 6th, the relation between the US and Mexico will start working in a different way. We know that Kamala Harris is coming in person June 8th, and I was very worried that she was coming before the election time because she wanted to have a visit before, and today they are having a Zoom meeting, but she's coming in person in next month. So I think from that moment on, the relation between Mexico and Canada and the US can start working in a different way. So let's hope things will change, and we really take the opportunity to build a new economy and to finish with or deal with the pandemic in a different way. Thank you so much for the invitation, María Cristina.
Thank you, Susana. Thank you, Kim. I really appreciate that you took the time for being with us and to share your views on all these issues. I hope that when we have the next 100 days, we can have another webinar to see how it goes. I would be very happy to have you again here. I thank also the people who join us here in Zoom and in Facebook Live. We invite you to follow us in our social networks, to give us a like if you like, and to invite you for next Tuesday, I will be interviewing for the former president of the Dominican Republic, Leonel Fernandez, and we will be speaking about the situation of Latin American integration, the challenges we are facing due to the pandemic and related matters. So please join us. It will be at 5 p.m. And again, thank you, Susana. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.
I wish you a good weekend. Take care.
Good.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Take care.